In a short but interesting TEDx talk, Derek Sivers says that you should keep your goals to yourself. Should you keep your goals to yourself? Research, he says, shows that those who talk about what they're going to do in the end are the least likely to do it. According to one study, he says when others notice your goal, which of course they'll do if you tell them what it is, that their recognition of it is a reward in itself, and that will then cause you to reduce your efforts toward achieving it. Napoleon Hill, however, said that whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve, which seems to contradict this research. How? It's because it makes no mention of whether you tell anyone about it or not. If you can imagine it and believe that you can accomplish it, then you can achieve it, no matter who you tell. The thing is, however, that when your goal is socially validated, that is, others approve of it and compliment you on it, then it can make you think that you've already achieved it. This is no contradiction. The difference is that you have to see it and believe it. But when you share it with others, then there's a risk that it can change the way you feel about it. And it's those feelings that you get when others validate your goal that can put the achievement of it at risk. What is meant by your identity? Well, many people find their identity in their jobs. If they work as carpenters, then they may identify as carpenters. If they teach school, then they may identify as school teachers. Some find their identity in a person. Christians, for example, find their identity in Christ. Everything they do is with respect to Him. When your goals are bound up in your identity, it's then that keeping quiet about them seems to be a good idea. And you've probably noticed this in your own experience. You've observed that those who talk about what they're going to do often don't actually do it. And that's because people have admired them because of the goal rather than the goal itself. And when people are admired, it makes them feel good. Now, there's nothing wrong with feeling good about yourself. But when you feel good because of the goal, rather than because of the effort you're putting forth to achieve it, then you risk not doing it at all. And that's what happens. People praise you for making the goal rather than praising the goal that you're going to pursue. When they praise you, then you're less motivated to do it because they have validated you. But if the work is praised, then you aren't validated simply for having that dream. Praising the person is tied closely to the fixed mindset that Carol Dweck talks about in her book of the same title, Mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, then you can accept the things the way they are. You don't believe that you can grow. Praising the task is tied to the growth mindset, which says, in effect, that you can grow in such a way as to be able to do more. Why does feeling good about setting the goal matter so much? It's because when people congratulate you, your brain takes their enthusiasm to mean that the plan has already been implemented. In other words, it allows you to experience some of the satisfaction you'd get from achieving it. Think about something that you planned to do in the past. Did you find that when you discussed it with your parents, or your spouse, or your friends, that when they got excited about it, that afterwards your enthusiasm waned and you actually didn't do it? Within this problem lies the solution. If your brain is susceptible to experiencing the euphoria of reaching a goal simply by talking about it with someone else, then you'd think that the solution was not to talk about it, as Derek Sivers has mentioned. Novelists, for instance, are warned to keep their stories to themselves while they're writing because some of the magic will be lost if they don't. No doubt there is some truth to that for novelists. I can tell you that as a writer of nonfiction, that if I discuss my ideas in too much detail, rather than getting them out on paper first, then I tend to forget them too. But that's not because the magic is lost. Instead, it's due to two other things. One is called the Zeigarnik effect, which was discovered 100 years ago by Bluma Wolfovna Zeigarnik, a Lithuanian psychologist. The Zeigarnik effect is that gnawing reminder that you have of an unfinished or incomplete task. The other thing is the Ovsiankina effect, which was discovered by Maria Ovsiankina, a colleague of Zeigarnik. The Ovsiankina effect is the inclination that you have to complete that task. Taken together, it works like this. When you begin something, if you don't finish it, if you have to leave its completion for another time, then you tend to remember it. But it's more than that. You also have a kind of internal drive to return to it until it is completed. Once you have completed it, you experience a corresponding emotion, a sort of closure. But if you just talk about it, then a number of things will happen. One is that you'll resolve the tension in your ideas. You'll work out what you're thinking. Now, if you make notes while you do this, then you'll be able to develop those ideas later on. But few people do this in a conversation, and so you'll lose much of the development of those ideas simply because you won't be able to recall them later on. Another thing that will happen is that the psychological pressure to complete the task, the Ovsiankina effect, will be removed because having discussed it with one or more people, your mind will feel that you've completed it. And because your mind senses that it has been completed, you'll forget even more about what you talked about. In other words, you won't be reminded to do it as you would from the Zeigarnik effect. It's all tied into the feelings you get when you discuss your goals with others. So how do you make sure that you follow through on your plans without refusing to talk about your goals with others? It's by doing something that Jim Rohn has suggested. He says that we should find happiness, that means satisfaction or feeling good about yourself, in what we have while pursuing what we want. Let me say that again. We should find happiness in what we have while pursuing what we want. Among other things, that means that when you talk about what you want to do, simultaneously you delay the satisfaction of having done so until you actually have it. You delay the emotional gratification that you know you'll feel after you do it until the time when you actually complete it. You don't allow yourself to feel that release before you complete the task. How do you do that? By how you describe them. For instance, write down your goals in detail before you share them with anyone else. And then when you do share them, omit most of that detail. People don't need to know everything, so you can be vague. That way you won't seem rude when you talk to other people, but neither will you experience the same intensity of emotion as you would if you had actually achieved them. There's a verse in the book of Proverbs that says something like, "Only a fool tells people everything he knows." That's my paraphrase, but it's relevant for this topic. You shouldn't fall into either extreme. You shouldn't just clam up because when you discuss your ideas with others, they can give you insights and wisdom that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But telling people everything can sound like bragging. It can also leave you feeling empty inside, too. The key is to reveal as much or as little as required to satisfy your audience without giving yourself the emotional closure that comes from doing so. What Jim Rohn says is true. There's satisfaction in what you have, and there's satisfaction in what you want. But you can't let yourself experience one before the other. You can't allow yourself to feel the positive emotion of achieving your goals before you actually reach them. To repeat the point, if you allow yourself to feel the emotion of completion, then you're less likely to do it. Think about what those you speak to want to know. Give them a little. If they want more, they'll make that clear. And if they don't, then anything extra that you say will fall on deaf ears. Either way, you'll know how much to say about yourself. The last thing is that you shouldn't be afraid to say that you haven't worked out all of the details yet. That will satisfy most people, and it will let them know that you're still actively working things out. Your friends and family will be curious about what you do, about what you're working on. That's because they care about you. But most of them won't want a lot of detail until you've actually accomplished what you set out to do. I'm Dr. Bruce Hoag.